In this recording, I will attempt to discuss or to declare, if you prefer, what are, from my point of view, that is, from the point of view of an architectural historian, the implications in studying construction history, at least some of them, of course, and some of the intersections between construction history and architectural history at large, and other methodologies of historical research, such as, well, we will briefly mention other social and historical sciences, such as archaeology and anthropology. Okay? This is not to say that construction history is not a useful professional tool and not a useful part of the cultural baggage of an architect or an engineer who will work most probably in their lives many times with historical artifacts and thus need to have some experience in dealing with them, need to build up a correct methodology to approach these built objects or historical contexts. Obviously, the usefulness of what we're doing here, I hope, is out of the question. However, since we're going to be passing a lot of time together this year, and since this course is built by combining two different expertises or two different kinds of competences, that of the architectural historian and that of the construction scientist, which is obviously my colleague, Professor Ventura, I think it's important at the very beginning to declare both points of view, keeping in mind that for the course, obviously, we have set ourselves some common objectives and we want to work together in reaching them. Now, our outline here for this chat is, I hope, sufficiently clear. Not just a useful history is my point of departure. Let's see what we can mean by this opening. Useful, but not only that. Okay, directly useful, but maybe that's not the whole. That's not the whole picture. I will begin by reading sort of a definition of construction history and its uses in the words of a very important 20th century Italian structural engineer and construction historian called Antonino Giuffre. I have translated myself some excerpts from an essay by Giuffre dating from 1995. Now, construction history, says Giuffre, frequently is able to prove that a building has had different configurations over time. In each of its different states, the building's static equilibrium has been realized in a specific manner. The modifications or integrations to the building have then introduced new loads and new structures. It is obviously of vital importance to the engineer or the architect working on the restoration and reuse to know in detail about these different states and changes in the building's history. And I think we all agreed with that, I must add. To achieve this knowledge, says Giuffre, historical analysis needs to be checked against an accurate survey of the building's structure and form. So you see, we have already two kinds of approaches, two actions: historical analysis and the building survey. We need to consider, let's say, both outlooks, both ways of approaching the building. Okay? As the survey frequently leads to the discovery of changes in the way different parts are built, history should help to explain these discontinuities. Are they due to separate interventions in different periods or to changes in the workforce? The on-site presence of different construction companies may in itself lead to significant changes in the mechanical behavior of a building. Again, we have here the same question and two different data sets. The survey, which tells us something, and Jouffret says history. He means by this historical research, archival research, research into the documents and into the historiography that talks us about not just the building, but the period, the historical context in which the building was built. Without this research, without the survey, without the close observation of the building, will not lead to anything significant. But also, just looking at the building is not enough if we don't have a complex idea and some information on the historical context and on the documentation that may talk about and may tell us about the construction. Historical research, says again Jouffret, might also provide indications to verify the relation between construction techniques that appear in the building's configuration today and those of the past. The attribution of historical documental value to a construction technique may then lead to a shift in the project, from a substitution to a conservation hypothesis. Now, I think this definition by Jouffret, which is much, let's say, much richer than it looks like. It seems quite straightforward and logical, but in reality, Jouffret is telling us a lot of things. He's telling us that we can begin by, let's say, looking for information in historical research, and we may end up even modifying the project itself. So there's potentially a loop or a circularity between the project that asks us something about the building, maybe the restoration project or the structural maintenance and so on. So we have a project, then so we look for things in history, and in the survey, but then the answers may lead us to change the project, and so the circle begins again, because maybe a new project will lead also to a new questioning, and then eventually we must do something for the building, so everything stops when we have to intervene. But the point is that the construction historian does not only, let's say, give answers to the designer, but he reassesses the building and its value in function maybe of specific design questions or of specific problems that the designer might have in the beginning. Far from being only a utility or a service to other practices, then, construction history can become a new and different way to look at architecture. And this is what I think this is our ultimate aim. In a certain sense, it is a persuasive aim to make you, let's say, understand or to convince you that construction history may modify the way we look at buildings, whether they are historical in the traditional sense, okay, but also even when they are recently built buildings, okay. One thing is how they appear in their finished form, but when we work and when we study the processes and their construction history, which might be also a very recent one, okay, it is quite possible and almost unavoidable to look them again, to look at them again and see some completely different objects or the same objects, maybe with different meanings. Now, just to make an example, I'm using here one of the most famous early images accompanying one 19th century essay in construction history, one of the, let's say, fundamental texts published in English on construction history of the Gothic stone vaults, the essay by Robert Willis on the construction of vaults in the Middle Ages from 1842. Well, this illustration has, I believe, besides giving us some precise information about this specific type of fan vault, I think has modified forever the way we look at these structures, even from below, okay, in showing us something that was not supposed to be seen, and in showing it in a certain way. So Robert Willis is not just showing the vault from above, but he's showing a model of the vault where we see not just the vault from above, but also some elements that constitute the interior of its masonry. We are seeing here with clarity the different joints between the stones, which we don't see so clearly in reality. And we see here even the composition and, let's say, ideal representation of the composition of the filling or the rubble that fills in the vaults at their springing, thus providing some very important load in these very delicate parts of the vault. So this drawing, okay, is really the result of a research. It brings with himself a thesis, an interpretation of the construction, and arguably it modifies the way we see the structures from this moment onwards. Now, I think that we should very briefly go through, if you can bear with me, a more, let's say, a slightly more academic and boring exercise. I think that this, before, say, advancing into the issue of construction history proper, I think I should inform you or remind you, if you already knew about it, that architectural history and history today, contemporary history today, is rediscussing one of the most important concepts that historian have to deal with, that is time. Okay? There is a problem with time and with the passing of time that contemporary society has. Okay? Either overlooking the fact that time is a constant phenomenon, okay, or let's say not considering issues that have to do with the most complex problem that the passing of time, complex research also issues and philosophical issues that the passing of time would lead to consider. So in this short discussion that you may, if you want, you may skip and go directly to the next paragraph. But in this discussion, which is outlined in 2 pages, titled "The Critical Function of History, Heritage and the Past-Present Loop," on the PDF that I have uploaded, I would like to use, to make my point, the work and some the books and the writings of one of the most important French historians today, called François Hartog. You see here the cover of his most famous book in an English translation. And besides that, you can see that on the cover we have architecture, we have building. Actually, you should recognize also that this is Italian architecture. It's the Eur neighborhood, the great, let's say, the urban complex just outside Rome that was built for an international exhibition that was never held because of the outbreak of World War II. Okay? So this suspended place built for an event that never happened seemed probably appropriate as, let's say, an introducing image to the book on regimes of historicity. Well, François Hartog discusses the core of his discussion is about our relationship to time and the relationship of historical writing to time. Hartog points out that historical research is characterized, or should be characterized, by what he calls the pratique du regard éloigné. That is, I translated it as the practice of looking at a distance. And he said that this practice of looking at a distance that historians must use to approach a problem, that is, I can't understand a problem when I'm immersed in it. Okay? For a historian, there's the need to take a step back and look at his problem, we could say, in a wider perspective. Not because he can disengage himself totally from the history he is living. Okay, that's not the point. The point is really looking at the thing you are living or at the problem you want to deal with in a decentralized manner, and by taking this metaphorical step back. Now, he says this step back of the historian, this stepping back of the historian, may still have a very special role in modern society. It helps to avoid or mitigate the risk of being passively overrun by the dominant experience of the present. Hartog, in fact, argues that we live in a world where the immediate and short-term performances and consequences of our actions seem to be the only things that have meaning and value. He calls this attitude, which de-evaluates both the past and the future, presentism. You see here in the cover of the book we have presentism and experiences of time. For Hartog, presentism is this overarching importance of the present. Only what is happening now has a meaning, okay? And our obsession with streaming and communicating instantly everything that happens, in checking constantly what is happening everywhere and anywhere on our social networks, but also on the news and so on, is something new in world history, actually, and in the history of culture, and is what Hartog defines with the term presentism. Okay? He doesn't condemn it, he just points out that it's a reality. This new relationship to time is connected to the end of the modern myth of the future, Hartog says. The future that was considered all along modernity as the time of an indefinite social and economic progress. Modernity is based on the idea of a progress that leads us into a more positive future. Maybe not individually, but at least collectively. Without that expectation, which arguably is crumbling under our feet, if not, it has already completely disappeared, without that expectation, the whole, we could say, contract of modernity with time has no meaning anymore. It must change. This idea of an overarching present, however, is also connected to other phenomena. Globalization, with its reduction, extreme reduction of the connection between space and time. Once mobility was as much connected to time as it was to space. Okay? We couldn't move all the time, and we moved slower. And so any kind of mobility was evaluated and even narrated in function of its time. This is no longer it's no longer an issue. On the other side, the time of travel is, as much as possible, has been erased from our experience. We go to one place, but the act of going doesn't take significant time anymore. And another extremely important phenomenon, of course, which we are experiencing also today with our virtual classrooms, whether they work or not, is the advent of digital media, a form of storage and also instant communication that is not only a much faster form, a rapid form of communication, but it's a form of communication in which all data, all information is instantly available regardless of the moment of its production. I can simultaneously read on my laptop a book, digitized book, published in 1490, one of the first books in print in Western history, and an e-book that has been published yesterday with the clicking of a button, okay, by an academic in Canada. Okay. Of course, I can know that these two texts have been produced separately, but the form of communication eliminates any, say, visual or factual or material difference between the two. Now, in the face of this perfect storm, where the immediate contingencies rule over a flattened horizon of time, Hartog argues that we sometimes react, maybe I could say we overreact, by reinventing the past in simplified forms, fabricated to work as forms of compensation, and Hartog uses the word alibi, to our loss of memory and to the dwindling of our future expectations. Our obsession with heritage, Hartog says, is the contradictory result of a dominance of the present. We seek refuge in heritage, a psychological refuge. But this view of the past, or this use of the past, Hartog points out, without condemning it, is purely instrumental, as it has the tendency to offer an immediate experience of heritage as a limited yet easily consumable commodity. And Hartog himself uses as an example to this new idea of heritage as an instant past, in a certain sense, uses as an example the heritage zones of global cities. Global cities, whether, I mean, in any part of the world. I'm showing here a wonderful place where I've been, a heritage zone in a very ancient city in central China, Suzhou, okay, where the heritage zone, in a certain sense, has replaced a part of the historical city, even physically replacing it with an extensive reconstruction of the image and of the substance of the urban tissue. In examples such as these, we seem not to be interested in the past as something that is no more. The past is no more there. Okay. We want it, on the other hand, we want it again, we want it now, available, lighted up, and in full color. If this is, in a certain manner, the problem with heritage today, or one of the problems with heritage today and heritage policies, Hartog nevertheless encourages us to explore the potential of historical research as a critical tool. History might still be useful, he argues, providing we come to terms with our mobile and changing relationship to time. Only by understanding that our relationship with the past, as that with the future, is constantly being redefined, we can eventually escape the straitjacket of an eternal present, where the past is consumed in the form of 2- or 3-dimensional images, or something midway between the two, such as this fascinating, for me, heritage zone. It's sort of a relaxed zone called the Heritage Zone at Singapore International Airport. So, historians, therefore, should ask and must ask some not so obvious questions. Okay, what does the passing of time mean to us? How do we relate to the present, the future, such as this, the future that is, how to say, previewed in this bizarre image, and the past as it appears in historical artifacts and historical documents, such as this page from a Chinese treatise on wooden construction and on the construction of architecture. What value, if any, do we assign to time and temporality? Is there a value in the fact that the page that we are looking at now is several hundred years old? What does this mean? Is there an added value to it? Or is it the same as what we are seeing here? An image of a heritage allusion in a contemporary infrastructure. Okay? As professionals working with historical artifacts, manipulating them, investigating them in order to preserve them, architectural historians, as well as restoration and heritage experts, must not refrain from asking this question. Back to construction history then. In order to apply Hartog's definition of looking at a distance to the topic of this course, the first step back that we are taking is in looking at how and why construction history emerged. When did a specific interest in construction history develop in Western culture? When did it become a legitimate object of speculation? What are some basic questions associated with its development? We'll deal with these issues in the following pages and in the following part of the video.